Hi everyone, it's me again. So I haven't made a vlog video like this in a while, where I'm just kind of standing in front of the camera talking about my opinion about something. And I think I've said several times before, the reason for that is because I figured that nobody really cares about what I have to say. But sometimes you just feel like expressing your opinion on something, and so that's why I'm here. Some people will probably wonder, why am I making this video? Why am I saying the things that I say here? And there's really no other reason than just that I felt like saying these things. I do have a point. I don't have any specific agenda necessarily, but I do have a point which I'll get to later. But if you're wondering why am I here, I just felt like talking about something, wanted to get something off my chest, and thought that maybe somewhere there's somebody who might be interested in hearing about it, listening for a bit. So that's why I'm here. If you want to listen in, you're welcome to. If not, then you don't have to. So what did I want to talk about? As you'll probably see in the title of the video. But basically, my point is more or less that the time when the time of technological innovation has passed. We're no longer living in a time of technological innovation. What do I mean by that? Well, I was born in 1981, and that was a time when technology of all types, particularly computer technology, was really developing very rapidly. And most of the 20th century was a time of nearly continuous and very significant technological development. There was the car. The car was a little bit before the 20th century, but the car only became really widespread. It became a really widespread technology in the 20th century. Then there was the airplane not too long after that, and of course the airplane developed a lot from the Wright brothers' initial flyer to the kind of aircraft that we have now. Then there was the space race, and then of course in the late 20th century it became about computers and the internet, and that became a really huge deal. But all of that has kind of left us now, and we're kind of at a point in history where things are not being developed very much. And I know that it may be temporary. Usually when people say things like this, people very quickly bring up that famous quote from, what was his name? I don't remember the gentleman's name now. In fact, I think the quote was apocryphal, but there's a commonly cited quote which is attributed to a guy who was the head of the U.S. Patent Office around 100 years ago, where he said something to the effect of, soon the patent office will need to close because everything that's inventable, everything that could be invented has already been invented, and so there'd be no more patents after that. And this was 100 years ago, before most of the things that I mentioned were invented. And so the quote is often used as a sort of an example of short-sightedness, of people's assumption that there are no more ideas, that we're out of ideas, that everything that can be done has already been done. So a couple of things to that point. First of all, that quote is probably apocryphal. There's evidence that that particular guy never actually said what he said. But okay, fair enough. Even if he didn't actually say that, there are other people who've said similar things. There are many people who've said throughout history that human innovation is pretty much over. We've already developed and invented everything that we could possibly need, and there's no way that we can be creative enough to come up with something else. And then somebody comes out with something like the internet or the computer or whatever, and turns the whole world upside down. So, you may say, well, this is ignorant and short-sighted of me to say that the time of technological innovation is over. So let me qualify that by saying, I'm not saying that it's over forever. I'm just saying that it's over for right now. It's very possible that at some point in the future, some huge technological breakthrough will happen, and that might change, things obviously in the future, that might change how things happen after that. But for about the past 20 years, pretty much rather coinciding with the beginning of the 21st century, is around the time when technology stopped really developing very much. And people will contest that statement as well and say things like, well, what about smartphones? I mean, everybody has smartphones now, don't they? And smartphones got big after the 21st century started. Well, yes, they did, but smartphones already existed before the 21st century. They just became more practical. They became more widespread. It's really not. It's not so much that we didn't have the technology for them before. It's more just that society wasn't in a state where people wanted to have smartphones. People wanted to have proper computers with big screens and big keyboards. And it's more of a social shift than a technological shift that people like to have phones in their pockets. And even if you say that smartphones are something really new, I mean, think about it. The original iPhone came out in, when did it come out? Hold on, I wrote some notes here. Right, June of 2007. I'm making this in June of 2019. So as I'm speaking now, the original iPhone, the very first iPhone, came out about 12 years ago. That's in technological terms, that's quite a lot of time. 12 years is a long time. And smartphones haven't really evolved that much since then. I mean, I've seen the newest iPhones. I mean, I've not too recently had the occasion to use an iPhone 8. And it's not that much different from the original iPhone. I mean, okay, there are some things that have been changed. Yeah, the phone is physically a bit thinner. Yeah, maybe the screen is a little bit higher resolution, and there's some tweaks like that. But it's not radically different. The smartphone of today is not much different from the iPhone of 12 years ago. So I don't see that there has been a lot of technological progress on that front in more than a decade. And you can say, well, the changes have been evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Well, yeah, they have been, but that's exactly my point. It doesn't take a team of genius engineers to tweak some software changes, to make some small changes to a user interface, or to redesign a device and make the device different looking. I mean, that's more of a design thing than an engineering. It's not really technology. It's not technological advancement. It's just a change in design. So, what really has happened in the last 10 years that is any kind of a significant technological development for us? I mean, for humanity, for the world. I really can't think of anything. I mean, everything else that we have now, and we talk about technology that shapes our lives today. Everything else that we have, I mean, the internet's been around for decades, and computers too. I mean, like I said, I was born in 1981. By then, we already had home computers. And yeah, of course, computers got faster. They got, they developed more storage capacity and better graphics and things like that. But the basic idea of the computer has stayed the same for decades. And everything else, I mean, like I mentioned, cars and airplanes, I mean, those were revolutionary when they came out almost 100 years ago. But is the car of today, I mean, if you have a car, your car of today is probably not dramatically different from a car from 30, 40 years ago. So maybe I'm just ignorant, but I don't really see any really significant technological development that's happened in at least a decade. And I would actually say probably significantly more than a decade, probably closer to 2 decades. So that's just my take on it. And again, I come back to the question, why am I saying this? You might be watching this and saying, well, okay, so what? What's your point? I mean, why do you say this? Well, I bring this up because I think it's important for people to understand this for a couple of reasons. One reason is because we talk a lot about technology as if it's really something wonderful that's really changing our lives. And I don't think that's true anymore. It changed our lives. I mean, we use computers in the internet. I use computers in the internet too. I'm making this video right now to put this video on the internet so that people can watch it on the internet. So, I mean, I use the internet like everyone else, and I'm not against the internet. I'm not complaining about technology as such. This is not a rant against technology. It's just me saying that technology has gotten to a point where it doesn't really need to develop much more. There's not really much else that we could or even want to develop. I mean, really, what would you... If you could design some kind of science fiction scenario for the future, what could you really come up with that that would really be, aside from like outer space stuff? I mean, yeah, okay, travel to distant planets and things like that. That's been a fantasy of people for thousands of years, and I don't know if we'll realize that anytime soon. I don't know if we're going to send people to Mars or anything like that anytime in the near future. I don't know. I can't see the future. I kind of doubt it, to be honest. But okay, but that's not a new idea. I mean, those kinds of ideas have been around for, again, literally thousands of years. Teleportation, maybe. I don't know how close we are to inventing a real teleporter that can teleport people or even objects any significant distance. Okay, that would probably change things. I mean, if we actually developed a teleporter, that would probably change things quite a bit. Biology and medical stuff. I mean, yeah, people are now making pretty significant advances in DNA research and things like that. But most of this is not really, in my opinion, most of this is not really going to enable us to do a whole lot that we couldn't do before. This is mostly just to help people with certain medical conditions. I mean, if you have cancer, obviously a cure for cancer or some kind of treatment for cancer is something very significant to you. But it doesn't really transform the world. You know, it doesn't really enable us to do anything that we couldn't do before. In contrast with the internet, which lets you communicate with somebody on the other side of the world in a matter of seconds, which is always something you couldn't do before. Electronic telecommunications technology. You know, I mean, I'm all for developing healthcare. I mean, yeah, developing treatments for cancer and other serious diseases like that, helping people be healthier. That's a great thing. But you know, one of the big fields, one of the biggest fields in technological development today is green energy. And that's kind of the same thing. Green energy doesn't actually let us do anything different. Even if we could replace all of our coal burning, fossil fuel burning power plants with wind power, solar power, or water power, you know, just generally green, renewable energy plants, that would be a great thing. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against green energy. I mean, I recognize that climate change is very significant. I do believe that we should be doing things to, you know, try to protect the environment, protect our planet. So I'm certainly not suggesting anything against those kinds of technologies, but what I'm saying is those technologies don't really enable us to do anything that we couldn't do before. We're just basically trying to undo the damage from the technologies that we had already. And that's kind of, I think that's part of the point. We develop technologies like, again, like, you know, the airplane and the car. And then we spend decades trying to undo the damage that was done by those technologies. I mean, what's one reason why there's so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, why there's so many greenhouse gases, so many emissions being created? It's because of those vehicles, because of those technologies that we developed, all the industrial plants and all the cars and airplanes, which are tremendously effusive in terms of how much carbon dioxide they give off. So that seems to be sort of a recurring pattern in human history. We develop some great technology and we say, wow, this technology is so awesome, it'll enable us to do things we could never do before. But then we spend a lot of time recovering from the after effects of that. The same is true for smartphones and the internet. I mean, smartphone addiction is a pretty serious thing. I mean, if you go out anywhere, almost anywhere in the world, anywhere in any industrialized developed country, and even increasingly in undeveloped countries, if you go out anywhere, you see people just glued to their phones. They're not paying any attention to what's around them. They're not talking to people around them. They're just looking at what's on their phone. And you know, internet addiction, smartphone addiction is a serious thing. It's damaging to societies. And the internet has actually done a lot to damage human society. It connects people, but it also divides people. That's the thing. It's kind of a double-edged sword. The internet does connect people around the world, but it separates people from the people who are right next to them, because people would rather talk to somebody in a foreign country over a smartphone than to the person sitting next to them, wherever they physically are. So, you know, I'm saying these things because we tend to give technologists a free pass and say, well, if you're developing technology, then great, good for you. You're developing technologies that will make the world a better place and help people. But I don't think we should be so naive. Technologies do help people, but they also have a lot of negative effects for us. And I mean, I work in technology myself. I've worked in the IT industry for more than 10 years now, and so I'm not, again, I'm not against technology. I work in information technology, and I understand its benefits for people, and I think that those benefits are important. But the detriments and the risks associated with it for our society and for our environment are important as well. And so we shouldn't just automatically assume that if somebody's working in technology, that means we should just say, well, great, good for you. You're really doing something fantastic. Don't just assume that everybody who's working on technology is going to improve the world with it. A lot of people go into technology just to make money. And that's another point that I wanted to mention. It's a little bit of me feeling sorry for myself, but not only for myself, but also for a lot of other people who work in technology. Technology is not really a great industry to work in anymore. And I say this partly to young people who might be thinking about careers. If you're 18 years old, in most countries you're legally an adult at 18, right? I'm 37, so if you're watching this now and you're 18, I'm just a little bit more than twice your age. So I'm saying this partly to people who are, 17, 18, something like that, and maybe thinking about careers just as a word of caution, because I remember when I was that age and all I really wanted to do was work in the computer industry. Well, I got my wish, and it's kind of a case of careful what you wish for. To be fair, I think it's not so much that. I think the problem today is not that the computer industry isn't what I thought it was. I think it's more like it changed to become something that it didn't used to be. The problem with the computer industry today is that there isn't much of a computer industry, and there's just not much demand. You get the impression, sometimes when you read the news, you might get the impression that the only people who really have job prospects are people who work in technology. But the reality is that it's very difficult to get into technology fields because it's very competitive. There are so many people who want to get in. And you hear very often, here's a huge lie that people often hear. You hear that there's a shortage of qualified applicants. You hear that there's a shortage of people to work in the technology industry. That is absolutely not true. There are way more people who, I don't know for the whole world, but at least I was recently looking at statistics for the United States. So at least in the United States, which is certainly one of the world's leading industrial, technological countries, something like 10 times, literally about 10 times as many people graduate from engineering programs in universities every year than there are job openings in those engineering fields. So like, for example, if you're an electrical engineer, let's say you graduate this year with a degree in electrical engineering, there are 10 times as many people in any given year who graduate with a degree in electrical engineering as there are jobs for electrical engineers that open up nationwide in that year. And I'm speaking really nationwide here. Nationwide in all of America and all of the United States, there's 1/10 as many job openings for any type of engineer as there are engineers who graduate with a university degree in that field of engineering. So the idea that there's a shortage of qualified people, that there are not people who who want to work in that field or who are qualified, who are educated to work in that field, that's all nonsense. That's all lies. It's not true at all. It's not remotely true. It's quite the opposite. In fact, there are way too many people and not enough jobs for those people. So there's that. That's the first problem. And then the second problem is, again, because technology is not very innovative, it's sometimes very difficult to justify your presence anywhere you go. I mean, in the last few jobs that I've had, I've generally, had the realization that wherever I was, there wasn't very much for me to do. There wasn't a lot of work for me. There wasn't a lot of need for me to be in that company in any kind of position. And on the one hand, you can say, well, that sounds like a dream job. That means you get paid to not do too much work. Like you don't have to work too hard and you get paid to not do much. in theory, you could think of it that way, but the thing is, most companies are not stupid enough to keep employing people who serve no purpose. And most companies will eventually realize. In fact, my previous employers did realize. They all realized after a while that I wasn't doing very much because there wasn't very much for me to do. And, I would discuss it with my managers, and it would always come down to the same thing. We would say, it's not anything about your quality of work. It's not that your work is bad or anything to do with you or how you fit into the company. It's really just the fact that there's not much to be done. There's not enough work for technology workers because, there's just not that much to do. I mean, I'm fairly qualified. Like I said, I have more than 10 years of experience in the industry at this point. And I've generally gotten mostly good feedback about my work. So it's not anything to do with me or how I work. I don't think it's anything to do with me or how I work or the quality of my work. It's really just that there isn't that much to do. I've noticed this in other people as well. So, I'm not saying don't go into technology. I'm not saying don't pick technology as a career, but I'm just saying consider that. Don't believe the lies that there are just endless jobs waiting for you and that you can just jump out of university into a job position. It's not necessarily that easy. There are lots of people who get out of university, who graduate with a degree, and they can't find a job in their field for the simple reason that there's not enough demand for workers, for engineers in that field. So just consider that. And, people say a lot of things that are meant to be encouraging but can also be kind of misleading. Like, a lot of people tell me something like, you're a smart guy and so you should be able to find a job for that reason. I don't know if I'm that intelligent. I mean, I think I'm reasonably intelligent, but I don't think I'm some genius. I don't think I'm like Stephen Hawking or Albert Einstein level genius. But okay, you don't have to be. You don't have to be a genius. Let's say you're fairly intelligent. Okay, I think I'm reasonably intelligent human being. But really, who gets paid to be intelligent? You ever seen a person whose job title was smart person? That's not something you get paid for. Nobody pays you to sit in a chair and be smart. Or people say things like, well, you know a lot about computers, you should be able to get a job with that. Nobody gets paid to know a lot about computers or anything really. Nobody pays you to just sit somewhere and know things. It's not a job. It's not a job position just to know stuff. You have to make use of that knowledge. The only reason why any company will ever hire you is because they think that you can make them money. If the company thinks that you will be profitable to them and you can earn, a profit, financial, monetary profit for the company, that would be why they would hire you. And it doesn't matter how smart you are. You could be actually very not smart. You could be very not talented. But if the company thinks that you can get the money, if they think that they can make some money off you for whatever reason, then you'll probably get the job, because companies are in the business of making money. They're not necessarily in the business of hiring smart people or people who know a lot. Those may be assets, those may be good things to have, but that alone won't get you a job, because again, nobody gets paid just to be smart. Nobody gets paid to just sit around and be the smart person. That's not a job. So my problem, and I think a lot of people have this problem, is I'm not very business-minded. I can do things with computers, I can do things with technology. I can even speak fairly well. You see me here on the video, and I think it's apparent that in contrast to actually quite a few computer people, I'm fairly well spoken and I'm not too shy. Sometimes I get shy, but I mean, I'm not so shy that I can't stand in front of a crowd of people and deliver a speech or a presentation or something like that. I have some degree of people skills, I think, which is also very valuable. And people say, well, come on, you can speak well, you're articulate, you can stand before people, you can explain things to people, you can talk to people in a reasonable way. That's an asset, right? Yeah, sure, it's an asset, but again, it's also not something you get paid for. Nobody gets paid just to speak. I mean, there are lots of people, there are countless people, tons and tons of people on YouTube doing exactly this, doing exactly what I'm doing right now, sitting in front of a camera, expressing their opinion, and doing it for free just because they feel like talking. Because again, I'm just here because I felt like expressing my opinion, and a lot of people want to do that. So Nobody's going to pay you for that. Nobody's going to pay you to sit here or stand here in front of a camera and just say what you think. That's something that people do willingly for free. Nobody's going to pay you for that. So, be realistic about your job prospects. Be realistic about what people are likely to pay you for or employ you for. And again, I'm not saying you shouldn't go into technology. I mean, sometimes I enjoy it. Sometimes it is a lot of fun. But when I look at the industry and I look at the money and where the money's going, I realize that there's not necessarily a lot of future in it because, again, there's not a lot of technological innovation going on. In the late 1990s, when the whole dot-com thing was happening, whoa boy, that was really quite a time. That was really a time when there were more opportunities than there were people to fill them. And that's why that was such a special time. That was kind of a unique time in human history where there were really so many companies looking for people that they couldn't find people to fill them. And that's why at that time, if you had even fairly basic computer knowledge, you didn't have to even have a degree. If you had fairly basic computer knowledge and you lived in, especially if you lived in Silicon Valley geographically, but you didn't even have to live there. You could even live somewhere else, in some other major developed city. And you could probably fairly easily get a job as a, computer technician or a website designer or a programmer or something like that. So, that's what it's really like when there's really a demand. If there's really demand for job skills, then companies aren't that picky. They won't care too much about what you've studied or what you've done in the past. If they think that you can do something, they'll hire you. It's not like that now. Now the hiring process is very difficult. And, if you know your stuff, if you're good at a particular field, you can probably still get a job. I'm not saying, I have a job. There are lots of people who have jobs in technology. I'm not saying you can't get a job in technology, but it's changed a lot and it's not as much fun as it used to be, and it's a lot harder to get employed than it used to be. There's a lot more competition and a lot less positions, and I think that's a pattern that's going to continue at least into the near future. Again, long term, I don't know, 20 years from now, or maybe more, maybe less, I don't know, maybe it may change. Nobody knows the future. But at least for the time being, at least, like I said, for about the past 20 years or so, and probably for the foreseeable future, it's going to stay that way. So, it is what it is. I just wanted to rant about it for a bit, and that's really all I had to say. Again, just my opinion. I thought it might be interesting to some people, so that's why I said it. So this is me saying, we live in a time of not very much technological innovation. Take that as you will. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. I think I'll try to not stretch out this video too long, as I often tend to do. So thanks for watching, everyone. If anybody has any opinions, if anybody wants to follow up, please do, of course. It's YouTube, as they always say. Leave your comments in the comments below. If you want to comment at me, write anything in response, please feel free to do so. I'd be curious to see what other people have to say about this. But until then, I will sign off and say cheerio.